Today's speaker is our very own Abigail Garofalo. Not only is she a member and a host of our Everyday Environment series, but she is also our Extension State Specialist for our Illinois Master Naturalist program. So we're excited for you, Abigail, to share your knowledge today with us. So I will go ahead and turn it over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Amy. And yeah, definitely excited to be here and talk a little bit about a topic that I'm super passionate about. All of the picture, you'll notice this picture here on like our opening slide is a carpenter bee on a dandelion. That's actually a picture from my own yard and garden that we were able to use for the marketing for this. And you'll notice throughout this presentation, I took most of the photos myself, and a majority of those photos that I took are also from my own landscape. So, trying to showcase the ecology and the journey that that we can use to apply these concepts to our own landscape. I'm currently the Master Naturalist State Specialist, so I run the Master Naturalist program statewide and support the local coordinators in their local chapters. Previously, though, I was the extension educator for natural resources in Cook County, so I got to work on awesome programs that were very focused on how can we support private landscapes to have nature functionality and ecological processes occurring and promoting those. So I've been working on this for almost my whole extension career, and it's pretty exciting to be able to talk about it with you all today. And I hope you all learned something. A little heads up and disclaimer is like this is Ecology 101. So if you came into this like, oh gosh, ecology, that's like a kind of deep sciencey word that I don't have a background in science. Like I'm more on the, you know, like expressions of feelings with nature as opposed to like the understanding and the science of nature. I don't know if I'll be able to understand this. This is very basic 101. If you're somebody who's on the other end of that spectrum thinking, man, am I going to be bored here? One, it's always good to brush up, and two, we're going to be looking at a lot of different examples of ways that we can incorporate that. So, and if this is something, maybe this is a framework that you can use to teach your less ecologically minded neighbors and friends. So, that's a big piece of how we're trying to change the culture of what our home landscapes can be is being able to talk to our friends and neighbors because your friends and neighbors who don't buy into this are not going to attend this webinar. You are, but they're going to talk to you. So definitely keep that in mind as we go along. So we're talking about ecology at home. That's kind of our basics. But like, what even does that word mean? So let's break that down. And my space bar. There we go. So ecology definition wise, right? According to the Ecological Society of America, they provide this like general base definition of what does it mean? What does the word ecology mean? And that's the study of the relationships between living organisms, including humans, and their physical environment. It seeks to understand the vital connections between plants and animals and the world around them. So I have bolded a few things here, relationships and connections. So it's about how all of the things connect together. Imagine you look outside a window right now, and if you could annotate the outside world, right, and draw little arrows between all of the different things that are connected, that's ecology right there, is how those connections are occurring. And they come up in really unexpected ways. So like this image right here, I had longhorn bees roosting on my coreopsis. So this is like they're normally like ground nesting bees, but they were here and I was like, what's going on? And I asked like one of our pollinator experts, and we found out that they felt comfortable enough and safe enough in a space in my landscape to interact with like the flower in this way as opposed to like using it as a food source. We were finding it only in the morning. They were using it as an overnight roost site. So different unexpected things that are occurring in the ways that our ecological pieces of our environment, like all the different elements of our environment are connected, is really unexpected, but something that we can all look more into. So these are the five concepts I'm going to talk about today. Again, like really breaking it down, I'm going to go into each of them, and then I'm going to talk about, like how these things maybe aren't as present in our current systems, our human-centered systems, and how we can promote them in our human-centered centered systems. And these slides and these five concepts will come up very often. And I also have them like summarized at the end too, like with my name and email. So if you're like, oh my gosh, I didn't write this down fast enough, don't worry, it will be there. So we have everything is connected, energy flows, matter cycles, biodiversity is functional, not just beautiful, ecosystems have limits, and humans are part of nature, not separate. So let's start with the first one. Everything is connected. This image is of the mountain mint in my front yard. Um, and I think there's like a little bee at the top corner. So definitely like some more connections going on there. So thinking about how are the pieces in our landscape connected. So this is an image that I've used in like my Master Naturalist trainings and other things like that. So if you've trained with me or attended another talk of mine, you may have seen this. This is kind of like a classic, very rudimentary food web, right? Here we have our oak tree in the middle, and then we have things that eat that thing, right? We have some insects, we have some mammals, and then we have some other animals that eat the animals, right? We have some other or some other plants that are incorporated into that, all these different elements. But what is missing here, right, is the other ways that these species are connected. They aren't just connected through eating other things, they're connected through pollination, through seed dispersal, through disease control or lack thereof, right? Or disease vectors, right? There's all these different ways that the organisms in our ecosystem are connected. But we are seeing a lack of that connectivity in the landscapes these days, right? So we're seeing fragmented landscapes. We're seeing, you look at, go to like Google Maps and look at like the satellite view, and you can see the divisions between all the spaces. We're removing entire pieces of our ecosystem through chemical management, right? Saying like creating ecological dead zones so that way certain species can't maintain or survive, cutting out maybe entire portions of the food web or the food chain. We're taking water, and instead of allowing it to disperse across into wetlands or streams to meander slowly, we're channelizing them straight on, so that way they run off much quicker. And then we're also not providing very much wildlife habitat. So all of this kind of leads to that disconnection where wildlife have nowhere to really go, thus causing some conflict within our human systems as well. So when we're thinking about are like, what can we do about this connectivity, right? Because I'm not just here to be like, here's the ecological concept and here's how we're making it bad, right? What are we going to do about that, though? How are we going to reconnect these systems? And that's where we want to think of, we want to encourage connectivity. And there's this concept in ecology called bottom-up control or the bottom-up approach. And this is kind of like the field of dreams scenario. I have like an image here of the field of dreams. If you build it, he will come. Or I think the quote is he will come, but like they will come, right? So if you have producers or the plants that those are the ones that are controlling populations in an ecosystem. So that's the thing that we can control best in our home ecosystems, right? We're not in a great place to be introducing wolves. Coyotes are pretty much at capacity in every ecosystem in Illinois. So that's not really like, and we found that introduction of those things are not super successful, let alone welcomed. But introducing plants, that's something we can all do. And so we want to think of that bottom-up approach to reconnect all of these spaces and to create these connections and recultivate these connections again. So we want to plant plants that are evolved for that ecosystem and that site. So and I'll talk about that more in another element, but if it's a dry space, we want to think about dry loving plants. If it's a space that's got a downspout right next to it, we want to think of wet loving plants that are going to thrive and survive and be able to support the connections that we want to see more of. And on top of that, we want to plant some refugee population or some like refuge spaces. So like spaces for certain species that we want to see thrive more of. Classic example of this is planting milkweed, right? A lot of y'all are already doing this. We're planting milkweed because we're finding the decrease of that insect population. That's something we'll get into a little bit later, maybe. But essentially thinking about like what do the species we want to connect back in, what do they need, right? And so that kind of leads us to like this encouraging connectivity of habitat, right? So if we build it, they will come, right? So what do they need for them to survive, right? They need vegetation all year long for shelter, possibly food, logs and brush for space. That's the space that they need to protect themselves and to live and where their habitat or where their food's going to be found potentially. If we're looking at different mammal or bird populations, insects love to be in logs and brush. I My favorite thing I think that a forester said in one of our podcasts last season was like the most alive part of a forest is actually like the dead tree, because that's a lot of insects are taking solace in that space, and then birds in turn are coming into that. So that connectivity of even quote dead spaces are alive. So encouraging that those connections that are occurring, making natural nesting sites, and then again thinking about the things that we're wanting to connect back to the landscape. A lot of insects need like a little bit of bare soil, not enough that we're causing major erosion, but we often tend to like cover everything with like just straight up mulch. And so leaving some bare spaces, maybe even the ones that are covered a little bit by vegetation, but not necessarily by by living vegetation, not necessarily by like wood chips or something. So thinking about that when it comes to our habitat. Okay, moving on to concept number two, energy flows, matter cycles. I love the way that this kind of like concept feels very visual, and we'll get into that. And so thinking back to like everybody close their eyes and like think back to like grade school 101 biology, right? We talked about the different, quote, trophic levels of an ecosystem. And so there were like three terms that we learned that maybe like provide an itch in the back of your brain, if you haven't heard it in a while. And that is producers. And I realize I put this in a bad order, so I apologize. Producers, consumers, and decomposers. Producers make the food, consumers eat things for food, and decomposers break down the food into nutrients, right? And so this is a very like showing kind of like energy flow, right? So solar energy comes to the producers take that solar energy through the process of photosynthesis, and create food for themselves so they can grow. Primary consumers, the first level of consumers, eat those plants. Secondary consumers eat the primaries. Tertiaries eat the secondaries, right? So this is like 101 concept that's really going to help us understand the flow of energy throughout a ecological system. Is like things make food, things eat food, right? So keeping that in mind. So that's energy flows. Let's talk about nutrient cycle, right? So type in the chat. I'm going to make y'all like type something in the chat. What are some examples of cycles in nature? So we're saying nature or nutrient cycle. What are some of those nutrients? Yes, the water cycle, carbon. Yes. Oh, that's a great example. I was like, leaves. Are we talking about carbon? I was like, no, you're talking about how they like grow in the spring, produce food for the tree, and then die off in the winter, right? We're seeing these natural cycles in nature for sure. Yeah, there's a rock cycle, carbon cycle, nitrogen, water. Excellent. Lots of different cycles in nature, right? These are just three visual representations of cycles that I think just showcase a lot of really big features that I want us to think about. So on the right here, we have the carbon cycle. So thinking about how plants are facilitating that, animals by like doing respiration or releasing carbon dioxide, plants are taking in through photosynthesis carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, soil carbon. There's this like flow and cycling going on of carbon. We have the water cycle down here, right? Showcasing that, through evaporation, goes up into the atmosphere, Precipitation puts it on the land, then it flows through the water through a watershed, or maybe even like infiltrates into the soil, goes back up again through that cycle, maybe through some like plants, it comes up into the atmosphere, things like that. Same thing with our nitrogen cycle, a lot more like more complicated terms that we don't have to memorize or know, but kind of keeping in mind that like organisms are helping facilitate these cycles. These things are not just like going away. They're coming in. They're moving throughout these cycles. So something that we are seeing when it comes to like keeping in mind that ecological concept of energy flows, nutrient cycle, is that when we disrupt those systems, when we disrupt the flow, when we disrupt the cycle, whether that be like too much in or not enough back out, like not enough going, too many things going into the cycle where it can't all fit into it, or too much going out of the cycle where it can't restart, is we're seeing a lot of different challenges that come with this disruption of flow and disruption of nutrient cycling. So this is an image I actually took this morning. I literally got out of my car as I was dropping my kids off to be like, oh my gosh, this is an excellent example of excess nutrients. So this is a pond in a business park. Business parks, so there's lots of impervious surfaces. And on top of that, it is surrounded by turf grass. So a challenge that we see, and if I get a call about like an issue with a pond like this one, I'm going to refer them to a way more expert person. But my first thought is like, do you treat that turf grass around there? So one, these are built to hold on to water, but they're holding water that comes in very quickly. So it's picking up a lot of things on the ground. Water's not infiltrating into the soil. It's going straight into this pond, and everything that was on the roads and the grass is going straight into this pond very quickly. And so all of those nutrients are causing a buildup of excess nutrients in that pond system that's causing excessive growth, right? Which disrupts the function of that particular system. And so this is a challenge that we see with like excess nutrients. Something like a little bit more close to home that maybe some of you feel like very viscerally is when bunnies or rabbits get to your new plants or the new growth that you are so excited to see in the spring. So this is an example of woodland phlox that I planted 4 years ago that I took this picture today. This is what my woodland phlox looks like. And it's not because it's not happy here. I've seen it grow much bigger and flower, but dang it, do those bunnies get to my woodland phlox. So I'm seeing excessive herbivory to some of my plants because there's not enough of the upward pressure from those for on that species on the rabbits, right? There's not enough fear. There's like this term called ecology of fear where it's like they're not scared enough. They browse openly. They're not scared. Like, and many of you who live in other parts are like, yes, the deer are not scared enough of us, right? That means there's nothing that's freaking them out enough to not browse openly on you and overeating. And that's what we're seeing a lot with a lot of mammals in Illinois is like they're eating on the things, and we have to come up with ways to prevent that. I get questions a lot. They're like, what can I do to protect my plants if I don't want to cage them? And I'm like, get a hawk. Like, because that's kind of where the ecology tells us is like there's not enough of that pressure on the top for the energy. The energy's not flowing all the way through. So there's this buildup of like there's not enough control of the herbivores essentially. So what can we do about that? How can we reconnect the cycle, right? And encourage more energy flow. So talking about cycling, we want to consider leaving dead plant material all year long. This is something I mentioned before, right? So putting things back, leaving the energy and the nutrients that went into growing something, leave it there. Or you want to compost plant material that you have to kind of keep those nutrients again within the system, keep the cycle going. If the plants in your landscape produce like used that to grow, use those nutrients to grow, keep it within the system. Same with chop and drop, unless it's a diseased plant or it's got seeds that could mature and grow into weeds. Those are the only instance where you wouldn't want to drop practically. And then leaving your leaves, right? So those are the tree took energy to grow those leaves and convert you through the wonderful and amazing process of photosynthesis, create food, right? Allow those to feed the soil and serve as habitat for your landscape. One thing though that we want to keep in mind to avoid like that green pond scenario that can is reducing artificial inputs into this in the cycle, right? So just as much as we want to keep the cycle going, we don't want to overwhelm the cycle with so much that it can't actually make it through all of those different processes. And so, synthetic fertilizers, as well-meaning as we are, they are typically not used properly in the sense that like we put too much on. And so we want to kind of keep in mind, like, be very specific about that. Oftentimes we'll hear that like, if we're going to fertilize our grass, for example, it's like fertilize every major holiday in the summer. And it's like, that's so much fertilizer that you don't know if you need if you haven't done a soil test. So thinking in mind of like, are we overwhelming the cycle that it can't actually take in all of the nutrients we're introducing to it? And then same thing with leaves on impervious surfaces. So this creates like a phosphorus tea is what it's called. If we leave leaves on like roadside or on like, like in the street or on top of our stormwater drains. And so like that could create an influx in nutrients in our streams that causes a lot of challenges down the waterway as well. So keeping that in mind. So another thing that we're thinking about again, so that was nutrients, thinking about energy flow, energy flows, nutrient cycle. So we're thinking about the flow. We want to think about encouraging and providing energy for the organisms we want, right? So it's like we often are thinking that we often villainize the predators in our ecosystem. If we have a bird feeder, we're like, oh man, the hawk keeps hanging out by the feeder. Well, yeah, we created a nice little food den for them that they can just pick off those little birds one by one, man. But those predators are an important part of that energy flow of controlling and keeping one element of that trophic level from getting too big. And so we want to make sure that we're kind of encouraging those things. Same thing with wasps. We villainize wasps so much. But they are extremely beneficial and will really control a lot of the pests in your landscape if you let them thrive. We also want to research the organisms we don't want, right? Things that are pests, things that are nuisance species. So again, we're thinking about and we're encouraging the things we want. And the example that I have here is like um, uh, goldfinches. I love my goldfinches. I think they're just like my favorite little thing to delight at. Now my 5-year-old's like, Mom, a goldfinch, and that's the most beautiful thing in my soul. But I don't want mice in my house, and it is a problem that I have. And so one thing that we've found is that we've discovered over through research and exterminators will tell you this too, is like bird feeders are a big contributor to mice populations because it's an open food source for them. While planting native plants that provide the seed for the goldfinches you want or the other birds that you want aren't as open of a food source. They have to work a little bit harder for those aspects. So same food source, right? Like plant seeds, flower seeds, but not as causing as many problems when we're using native food sources and natural food sources as opposed to like providing artificial ones or like holding things open on a platter for them. Okay, so now onwards to biodiversity is functional, not just beautiful. I feel like I'm preaching to the choir. I feel like anybody who attended this is like, of course it's beautiful and functional. So we're going to talk a little bit about that function. So another little in the chat question here. Go ahead and type in the chat. And I gave you a little bit of a previous, like a cheat with our previous kind of food web thing. But what are some ways organisms interact with one another? And I realize that says interaction with one another, and I apologize. But what are some ways that organisms are interacting with one another? Awesome. Yeah. Seeing some really good. We're seeing pollination, things eating things, big things eating little things, predator prey. Um, uh, what was that? Oh, same food source. So like competition in that way. Seed dispersal. Um, yeah, consumption, eating things. We have letting another bird raise their young. That could be in a couple scenarios, right? Like that could be like commensalism, right? Like supporting another species, but it could also be parasitism, like in a cowbird scenario, where it's like taking on and taking resources from another organism. Just enjoyment, yeah. Freddy fungus and Alice algae. I love that. Those like that mutualistic relationship. So yeah, there are so many ways that organisms are interacting with one another, and that functionality um, is so important. And the way that we're promoting that is through many, many, many different things. But I would say, like, the biodiversity of it all is like the essential piece when it comes to our function, right? We're creating that resilience. We're creating lots of different functions by having lots of different species. You all were kind of talking about the way that different animals and insects are, different animals and plants are interacting with each other. And there's, specific biological terms for all of them. Some of them I have up here, ecological terms. But really, these are all different functions in an ecosystem that all of these different species, all of these different organisms are interacting with each other and supporting each other or doing different functions within each other. And so I'm going to provide an example as to when um, that functionality and like kind of like gets out of hand or doesn't work out so well when we are missing that biodiversity. So these are a couple of screen grabs from my local Facebook group, blurred out. So we're not calling out any names because I think these are all really reasonable questions that people were asking. But and these kind of go back into 25 and even this 26. But back in 2024, there was like posts all over our local Facebook group about this dark, sticky substance that was all over everybody's trash cans, everybody's plantings. I had red twig dogwoods that I had just planted that like the leaves were black, and I was like so upset because I was like, these I can't scrub leaves. Um, and it was people's cars. Like we had to like park our car on the street one day, and like it was like there was stuff all over the car. And this is what people's windows would look like, is this element. And there was great speculation as to the cause of this, but nobody ever kind of like took it down to like this kind of. A few people did, but the insect level scale was not the thought. There was a lot of questions about like we're over kind of like O'Hare planes fly over us a lot, so people were like, it's the airplanes. People thought it was like a local food factory that was like polluting the air, and like there was all of these questions, and then even EPA got involved, Illinois EPA, and it came down to that it was maple scale. And the big this was community wide, and it shocked people because it wasn't just like a neighborhood that had maple scale and had this like sooty mold problem. It was like from the entire community to people in the surrounding communities. All of these spaces were seeing maple scale everywhere. And so that's why people were having a hard time attributing it to this insect for this particular type of tree. And so it's funny to me though, because like this essentially what happened was is just to kind of explain how the scale works is the scale is a type of insect. It doesn't move in its adult stage. It attaches to the leaf. I have I didn't include a picture of the adult, but we can like look it up if we have time. And essentially, it produces honeydew. And so there was so much of this cottony maple scale underneath on the trees that it felt like it was like raining. Like I think somebody's comments was like, I feel the sap, like it feels like a sap raining down on sunny days. And then because it's like a sugary substance, it's like causing a perfect environment for this like sooty mold to produce as well. So that's what was giving that black look and substance and why people were attributing it to something else. But the what this kind of comes down to for me and what this was telling to me about ecology is there's something not quite functioning here to control this large amount of outbreak of a particular insect. And that is because there are a crazy amount of maples planted in my community. And I'm sure this is true of a lot of communities across Illinois, because we love a good maple and we loved planting a good maple a few years ago. Silver maple, Norway maple, sugar maple, they're all around red maple. We love planting maples in our community. I think I took a block walk and I counted 12 maples just along a block, in my neighborhood alone. And so that was how that particular insect was able to spread from space to space. Now, this is kind of like a local community example, but we've seen this in several tree diseases, in emerald ash borer, in Dutch elm disease. Um, we're seeing this in like deer populations with chronic wasting disease. So there's a lot of different reasons that lack of biodiversity in these landscapes is causing some challenges and decreasing the resiliency and functionality of our spaces, which is function being controlling disease. Oh, thank you, Amy. So all of that's to say is like a little more on this biodiversity lesson. You may be thinking, great, we just need more of different plants. Well, there's actually several different kinds of biodiversity. Biodiversity essentially just means a variety of life, but we can break it down into three main categories. So there's the classic species diversity, which we is what we normally think of is like we need more different kinds of species, right? And so here's like I have my examples of like a bunch of different kinds of birds. We need more species of birds. But there's also habitat diversity. So we need forests, we need prairies or grassland spaces, but we also need like different layers within a space, right? We need places that have like overstory, understory, ground level kind of spaces that provide all of these different elements of habitat. So we need a diversity of that. And then we also need genetic diversity, right? We need to make sure that we're encouraging, I'm getting thunder. We're encouraging a difference of allowing for genetic selection to occur and natural pressures to force organisms to adapt and naturally select for what's going to survive best. And so thinking about there's all these different kinds of diversity, biodiversity that we want to support in an ecosystem. So how can we do that? One, we can increase ecosystem function and beauty through planting more diverse ecosystems, right? So I recommend 20 plus species on your landscape. This isn't just in one garden bed, right? Think about your whole landscape as a whole. You can even work with your neighbor and call that your landscape. But planting a decent amount of native, I recommend native plants, but thinking about not just one or two or even like three species, you want a good amount. You also want to plant a variety of types of plants, not just perennials, but also native trees and shrubs. And you may be thinking, I don't think there's a tree I can fit on my landscape, or like trees are a big commitment. Plant it and see what happens. There are small shrubs as well that could really support you. And we got some webinars coming out that are really going to talk about some really cool benefits of trees, and a lot of these plants beyond just the functionality of an ecosystem. So really, really cool. Follow your rule of three with blooms. If you're like, what do I plant? Use some like kind of guidelines to do that. So I have this image here. These are like geraniums and columbines. These are early spring bloomers. We have butterfly weed and coneflower. That's our summer bloomer. And then we have kind of our late season bloomer, which is showy goldenrod. My mind is eluding me for like another late season bloomer I have, but I'm sure it's somewhere I can look. But kind of thinking in that way. Okay, next lesson, ecosystems have limits, right? So thinking about that there are limits to the ecosystems. And this is the idea that like nature can absorb disturbance, but only to a point. And so when we have biodiverse systems, they have backups, right? That's the resilience piece. When we have high biodiversity, we have resilience. But there are points where they break essentially, and they become overwhelmed with a resource or a certain organism or a certain lack of organism that they can't recover. And so I have a couple of examples here. On the left here, this is images from the State Waters Survey from Nashville, Illinois in 2024. So, due to our changing climate, we have seen an increased number of like heavy rainfall events and increased drought events. So, like the same amount of rain, but in shorter day number of days and longer amounts of dry periods. And that's putting a lot of stress on the system, right? That's really testing that resiliency, the limit of how much we can handle in our ecosystems. And so in Nashville, Illinois in 2024, 6 inches of rain dropped over 8 hours. That overwhelmed the reservoir and caused sometimes, in some places, 5 feet of water in this particular town. And so that was a point where there was an overwhelming amount of water that the system could not handle it anymore. And now it caused massive flooding event for that instance. The image on the right is a graph from a paper about the worldwide decline of insects, essentially making the claim that 40% of insect species are threatened with extinction. And the graph kind of outlines here are the different types of insects and the portion of their species that's, seeing not so much a decline, being vulnerable, being endangered, or being extinct. And so we're seeing uh, essential pieces of our ecosystem that support the function that allow the limit to be a little bit more high that are we're pulling them out and decreasing the limit of our ecosystem and decreasing the resiliency and the function of that particular space. And so insects are an essential piece of that. They are one of the main consumers, the top primary consumers in our ecosystem. And so seeing this decrease is showcasing that we're really limiting ourselves when it comes to insects because so many things eat insects. And if we don't have enough of those, there's not enough food to eat the things there's not enough food for the insectivores. So, what does that look like? We want to reduce artificial inputs for nature. I put this in here because this is like my kind of personal thing that I've been trying to look more at and understand and research. And helping people understand in the public. So we're doing a lot more inputs that are kind of quote overwhelming the system, that are pushing the limits. So fertilizers, right? We talked about fertilizers. That's overwhelming the nutrient cycle. That's reducing the limit of that particular ecosystem. Bird feeders are another thing. We're adding a bunch of food into the system, which feels like it's increasing the limit, but now we're adding a lot of options for birds to spread diseases and for other things to be a part of that system that maybe we didn't invite. And so it appears that we're increasing the limit, but we're actually putting a lot of pressure on things that don't have natural controls for them. Same thing with biocontrols. This kind of helps us understand that this is just, I Googled like praying mantis eggs. You can buy praying mantis eggs. And most of the times, though, they're Chinese mantis, and those are invasive species, or they're at least considered threatening to our native Carolina mantid. So we want to make sure that we're kind of thinking about like what are the inputs that we're adding in, quote, for nature when it's really for like we're not allowing the system to explore its own limit and work within that. So how do we keep the limit high? How do we increase the resiliency? How do we like make sure that we're not doing things that bring the limit of our ecosystem down? We want to plant things that don't need as many inputs, right? We don't need to add those inputs ourselves, right? So that means native plants, plants that have evolved to that ecosystem, and plants where their needs can be met and are not as limited, right? So right plant, right place. I mentioned this earlier. If it's a dry loving, if it has a particular soil type, if you have a spot where A downspout is like think about the conditions that that plant set likes to grow in. I always like to say we've been getting all this rain lately and these storms, and I hope everyone's staying safe. And if it's safe to go outside while it's raining, run outside and look around your landscape and see where that water is, right? Like go put on whatever kind of rain gear you need. I personally just don't mind getting wet, but run outside and look. Where is the water going on your landscape? And that's maybe where you need to consider planting or a notice, oh, I was gonna put a bunch of this particular plant here. And yeah, that's not gonna like I was gonna like that's not gonna work. So just kind of keep in mind what it looks like when it's raining and its most drastic time. The other piece I wanted to put on there is like, again, thinking about the limits of the ecosystem. We want to ask before we make a value judgment. We think a lot of natural processes within an ecosystem are, quote, bad or causing a problem, but they might be within the normal, quote, limits of that ecosystem. One of those is like insect damage to plants. We often see maybe like aphids are overtaking a certain milkweed plant, or we see a bunch of damage on a tree. That's normal. Honestly, I have more concerns if I don't see any insect damage on anything. And so I really thinking about like where is it within the limits of that system, right? I put not all wildlife is living. I meant to say not all wildlife is like meant to be living, right? There are certain genetic selections that are occurring. Moms of certain like bird moms, for example, will kick babies out of the nest if they don't think that they're genetically fit or they can raise them. Insects lay a lot of eggs because they know that not all of them are going to survive and that they get eaten a lot. So a lot of the times we think we need to like save the caterpillar so it can make it to butterfly stage, but maybe it's not ecologically fit enough and we should let nature take its course in that scenario and let it be the food for the lovely birds that you want to eat, that you want to around in your landscape as well. Same thing with raptors. I get a lot of like, ugh, when I hear people being like, well, I don't want raptors eating my favorite little birdies. And I'm like, yeah, you know what? Hawks got to eat too, man. So kind of keeping those things in mind. Also asking questions about, damage that you're seeing too. Same thing with the plant damage. If you have dead patches in grass, maybe that's, the grass saying, like grass telling you it's not meant to grow here, or this particular plant is not thriving. I have an eastern wahoo bush that's been sitting in front of my yard since I did my replanting in 2020, and it is about the same size that it was when it first grew or when I first planted it. Still flowers, and I'm like, I think it's not meant to grow there. I haven't gotten around to digging it up, but I'm asking that question of like maybe it's not thriving because it doesn't have what it needs, right? It's not living within that system, right? If you see digging holes in your garden, maybe there's bugs down there that somebody's taking care of you for you, and you should thank that little critter for taking care of those bugs, because maybe you don't want them. Maybe you do. Okay, let's go into our last one. So humans are a part of nature, not separate. You may be thinking like, okay, this is Ecology 101. This feels a little more like social science, but this is an essential piece because we often separate ourselves from ecology. And I'll talk a little more about that. I do realize now that this photo like really heavily features this barberry bush in my yard. Meant to have it focus on the coneflower, so apologies about that. But maybe that kind of showcases that, that's a part of nature too, and I need to do something to think about it. So this is a assessment that we often use in environmental education and research to assess like inclusion of nature in self scale. And this essentially is from a book published in 2002 that essentially was making the argument that human behavior toward the environment depends on the degree to which an individual believes nature is within like their personal sense of self. So like how crossed over these circles are is how um we feel like towards the environment depends on degree. Like how close it is essentially how like we feel as though like we should support nature, our behavior towards supporting the environment. And you can have your own kind of thoughts on where you think the public is. I would say we're always a little bit more towards the middle than we like to think. But I would even say that master naturalists are sometimes a little more to this side than they think. Because I often hear that, oh, well, nature is like where the prairies and forests are. No, it's like nature's in your house too, man. You are nature. You're interacting with that system, and how we're interacting with that system is really, really important. And so, you know, I bring this up to say that we often do think of our spaces as separate. So this is Central Illinois, this is Pleasant Plains, and you can see here there are already like categories of spaces that you can make circles of, right? This is where the people are. This is where the nature is. This is where the food for the people is grown, right? Looking at Southern Illinois, it's a little less so, right? But this is Shawnee National Forest over here. This is where the nature is. There's some farm in here. This is where the people are. The water is what connects us, which is really cool to think about. This is South Suburban Cook County, so Chicagoland area. And this is even more like apparent, right? This is where the people are. We fence nature into these spaces, right? It's all separated. And that's because we've decided that like human space is for human function. It's for where we live. It's for where we work. It's for where we grow our food, right? For humans. But then we say nature space is for the nature function. That's where the nature does its things to make life livable. It's where our water gets cleaned, right? Our water doesn't get cleaned in these human spaces. It gets cleaned here. Our air gets cleaned in these spaces, right? All of these things are occurring in the quote, the nature spaces. The forest preserves of Cook County will often say that they're like the lungs of the county. And I would like to argue that like, why can't the private landscapes where our neighborhoods are also continue to be lungs for that space? And this kind of separation, and when you take stormwater into account, right, this is exactly what we see as to why we're having these stormwater challenges in our urban landscapes, in our home landscapes, because we've decided that the nature function occurs over there. Stormwater control happens in nature spaces. Hate to break it to us, there ain't enough nature spaces left to hold that. So we got to have everything's got to be our nature spaces, is kind of where we're looking at. So I'm going to end and hopefully kind of just speed through a little bit of this, of like going through my landscape and my front bed and how that's kind of taken in these ecological lessons so you can help understand these. And this is that example that I mean with like humans are a part of that too. So this is my front yard in 2020. This is what my front yard looks like about a month or two ago. And so you'll notice here that there is about this much less lawn right here. And that was due to some unfortunate sewage pipe issues, but also some intentionality behind it. So you'll notice that my front yard slopes down. And in 2020 and 2021, the sidewalk was so lovingly called Lake Garofalo, because water would go straight from my roof down my downspout straight into here, and then anything else that landed on this landscape went straight onto the impervious surface on the sidewalk and just sat there as long as it could. Really annoying, but normally, your feet are wet. In the winter, definite hazard because that water would freeze and would now be ice skating Lake Chicago. This was something that I wanted to address with my own landscape. And so this is what the rains that we had, I believe on Tuesday, we had a pretty heavy rainfall event, and this is what it looked like right after that rainfall event. It's working, right? And my example of it working. We have data to show that, but if you want to see, we have data to show like how native plants and, increasing biodiversity helps stormwater function. We have that data, but this is also like an example. So going more into like how this landscape has kind of supported all these different ecological functions, I'm going to speed through like this is what it looked like initially. Again, unfortunate sewage pipe incident. Then we planted. This is, it's grown over time. I wish I had more photos of it up front from 21, just because I think that'd be really cool. But I have ones from every year and how it's evolved and changed over time. And it's gone from kind of like this haphazard to intentional landscape that also serves this really great function. So when we're thinking about everything is connected, one, we've reduced monoculture with this site particular. I have a list of the plants that I have. I know there are at least 10 in this particular bed alone. I'm leaving dead plant material. So these are some winter goldfinches feeding on here. Actually, one of my favorite nature things that I've ever observed in my front yard is in the summer, there was a goldfinch that was sitting perched on like a coneflower from the previous year, so a dead coneflower head, and was eating insects off of a milkweed plant right below it. So it was using the dead coneflower as a perch, which was just really, really cool to see. Um, Again, thinking about energy flow and matter cycle. So I'm slowing down the water. I'm not overwhelming the system with matter cycling, right? I'm chopping and dropping. So, you're like, wow, how did you get your early sunflowers to look that short? I'm Chelsea chopping, baby. I'm chopping back in May and July even, and I'm chopping again and again to keep them nice and short. So it takes some management, which is a whole other presentation for another time. But I'm not removing those plants that I'm chopping from the system. I'm just dropping them down onto the ground. And then I'm also densely planting, so I'm not having to add mulch. We just had to mulch other parts of our bed this last spring, and this particular bed, as you saw in previous pictures, I used to have to mulch pretty heavily. I no longer need to mulch this bed because it's so densely planted. So I'm providing a system and structure that's allowing for decreased additives. These are all just pictures of flowers from my garden showcasing biodiversity, having blooms of several seasons. I've got bluebells here. I'm having ferns. I don't have any shrubs that I have, but I have like buttonbush. I have red twig dogwood. There's lots of different species going on. And then to help control invasives, because there are several buckthorn hedges that my neighbors and blocks away and things like that have, and the birds spread, hand pulling those. Keeping in mind, this is kind of a crazy spreadsheet, but like right over here, I keep track of bloom times because I'm like, do I have enough? Because I always am like, could I add something else? Maybe. And so I might see like maybe I need to add something more in October, something like that, if there's anything that's going to be blooming in October. Thinking about the limits of an ecosystem, I'm really trying not to add any inputs, right, to decrease that limit. I'm spot treating herbicides, so I'm not taking out entire sections of a system. I'm not fogging for mosquitoes. I'm using a mosquito bucket system, which you're welcome to look up and research if you like, but essentially using a mosquito dunker to act as like a trap to attract mosquitoes to breed, but then not allowing those babies to mature into full adults, essentially. And in the winter, I'm not using a lot of salt, if any, to reduce that. And then the last piece, I know we're cutting close on time, is I know I already talked about like humans are a part of nature and adjusting that functionality, but I just wanted to end with as well that, it's not just about the ecology, thinking of human spaces and nature spaces and having the function of both, but it's also working within your community and encouraging others to think of that as well. And so I do have a certification in signage. Um, that showcases like here this is a conservation at home like intentional landscape, right? And then I also like these are pictures of my kids helping me with a different garden project. Like my kids are getting involved in all of that because I want them to understand and incorporate and see themselves closer in that like in that circle of self and nature, as opposed to separate, and so really being incorporated and intentional about being within those spaces. Okay, so that was a lot. I'm here for a couple minutes questions. I can also stay a little bit after. I just realized my internet might have gone out.
You're good.
Um, okay, good. And then just before anybody leaves, if you're like, thanks for coming in, I want to make sure that I put the plug in for the October webinar that Amy can put in the chat. That's going to be on community science in your backyard. So definitely go check that out if you want to take that ecology to the next level of like understanding and researching and being able to contribute to science as to why things are in your backyard. Definitely please go check that out. That'll be with Amy and Aaron, and they're awesome.
Awesome. Abigail, we had just a couple questions. One was about, and maybe you want to plug the upcoming podcast, but One was about mosquitoes and, just how do we encourage our local um, communities not to fog for mosquitoes? And then why are we even killing mosquitoes? Because they might be a food source.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a really great question. And it can seem like counterintuitive, right? Like, especially when I talked about mice too, it's like, well, why do we want to deter these things? Why do we want to kill them? Um, we are seeing an imbalance, right? In this space, we're seeing excessive mosquitoes. And there is also a certain amount of balance that we need to think about when it comes to functionality of our home landscapes and our um, and 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 our like the ecological function as well. And so to answer that last question, sometimes there are excessive mosquitoes, and also, we still have to think about the function of our homes and that aspect. And so using them in a spot treated way to deter them. Uh, the quote pest insects in that way. As far as the deterring fogging, there's data and research out there that showcases that fogging in is especially on like an individual property is like I don't remember what the exact percentage, but it's a lot of bycatch, which means essentially is it's killing not just mosquitoes, it's killing all the other insects in that area as well. A lot of mosquito companies or like insect companies will be like, "Oh, we use all natural oils and things like that fog them out and whatever." And um, all natural still means that it's something that is targeting that particular insect's function, and it's the same insect function that's being targeted with that as well. BT is a little different, like the mosquito dunks, those are targeting the mosquito like family, I believe. And we have a really great podcast coming up with Ken Johnson about insects, and we talk specifically about mosquitoes, and he knows a lot more than I do about that. Um, and so I highly encourage you checking that out.
Another quick thing.
Mhm.
I know you've worked with conservation at home, but are there any resources out there for apartment dwelling folks,
Mm.
small space folks?
Yeah. I know that there's a lot going on right now in the study and just like even like practical study of like balcony gardens. Um, I think depending on the space that you're in, there's a great opportunity for like collective action of the space that you don't think you have control over managing, but you can. There's a lot of apartment and condo spaces that are like the HOA manages, but really like that's a garden space that they really don't want to deal with and they pay somebody to deal with. So I think there's a lot of opportunity there to look at the other green spaces around your landscape, as well as volunteering in your local community. Maybe there's a Go Green group you want to participate in. But it never hurts to put a few blooms on your balcony, is what I'm going to say.
Awesome. Well, I think that's the end of the questions. Thank you so much, Abigail. We appreciate you. Great presentation. Thanks, everyone, for joining us today. Like Abigail said, our next webinar for this season will be on October 1st at 1 p.m. It's Aaron and I. We're going to talk about community science programs. And I did put the registration link for that in the chat box. And then also keep an eye out every Thursday. We release our podcast and our blog for the Everyday Environment series. So should
Oh,
be in your in.
Amy,
Oh, yes.
can I add? Somebody mentioned I highly suggest reading Bringing Nature Home by Doug
Oh,
Tallamy.
yeah.
And I wanted to make sure that y'all know, those who are still here, that we interviewed Doug Tallamy for our podcast this season. So if you like want to tune in for that, definitely check it out. He speaks on a lot of these concepts much more eloquently than me. And so if you want a chance to hear from him yourself.
Absolutely. It's so exciting. It's so exciting. So check us out every Thursday. I hope you guys have a wonderful afternoon. Thanks again for joining.